It feels like the ground has shifted overnight, like the calm surface of spring training has cracked to reveal something far more volatile underneath. Just when optimism was beginning to stretch its legs, reality barged in without knocking, dragging brutal injury updates and unanswered questions along with it. AJ's move is imminent, not because the front office wants drama, but because circumstance has cornered them. This is no longer a theoretical exercise about depth and patience. This is survival mode, and if you're watching the Blue Jays report, you can probably sense it too, that tightening in the chest that comes when a season starts asking serious questions before it's even begun. Yesterday landed like a cold slap. Anthony Santander's availability evaporated into a 5 to 6 month absence, and Shane Bieber's ramp-up stalled with forearm fatigue, the kind of phrase that makes every baseball fan instinctively wince. Injuries don't just remove players, they steal certainty, and suddenly Ross Atkins was standing at the podium not selling dreams, but explaining contingency plans. Spring training is officially upon us, and already it feels like the club is running uphill in sand. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video, share it with fellow fans, and subscribe to the Blue Jays report, because the next few weeks are going to be relentless. Ross Atkins spoke with a calm that almost felt rehearsed, the calm of a man who knows he has to project control even when the board in front of him is on fire. When asked about adding pitching or offense, his answer was telling in its simplicity. There is never a time when they are not thinking about additions via free agency or trade. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a deflection either. It was an admission that the roster you see today is not the roster he expects to break camp. That alone should tell you how seriously these injuries have been taken. The knock-on effect is immediate. 2 days ago, the starting rotation looked like a position of relative strength. Maybe not elite, but deep, layered, flexible. Now, Ben Francis is done for the year, Shane Bieber is shelved for the foreseeable future, and suddenly depth feels like an illusion you only appreciate once it's gone. This is where context matters. The front office didn't stumble into this. They opted into Bieber knowing there was risk. They stockpiled arms knowing attrition was inevitable. And yet, even with preparation, losing 2 options this quickly forces your hand. That's why one name has begun circling louder than the rest, like a rumor that refuses to die. Chris Bassett. Fans have already latched onto it, former players have whispered it into the void, and even insiders seem surprised he's still unsigned. Durable, adaptable, respected, Bassett is the kind of pitcher who doesn't dominate headlines but stabilizes everything around him. He can start, he can relieve, and more importantly, he can lead. At 36, he's not a long-term solution, but he's the kind of short-term answer that stops a bad situation from becoming a crisis. The beauty of a Bassett reunion is not just familiarity, but certainty. You know what he is. You know what he brings into a clubhouse. You know he won't flinch when asked to do something uncomfortable. And right now, comfort zones are a luxury Toronto can't afford. Reports suggest there hasn't yet been a formal offer from the Toronto Blue Jays, but things change quickly when injuries force urgency. The market always looks different once spring training begins to expose weaknesses. To be clear, this isn't about panic. The Jays do not absolutely need to add another starter to field a rotation. Eric Lauer is being stretched out, Jose Berrios is still here, and the organization has arms that can cover innings. But need and wisdom are not the same thing. There's a difference between surviving April and positioning yourself to thrive in August. And that's where the decision becomes philosophical. Do you trust volatility, or do you buy insurance? Shane Bieber's delayed ramp-up has quietly answered another question as well, one that hung over the winter like an unresolved argument. Why wasn't Jose Berrios traded? Why were the Jays so aggressive in pitching markets, even when they seemed crowded? The answer is now painfully clear. The front office knew there was fragility baked into this plan. They just didn't expect it to crack quite so loudly, quite so early. Suddenly, Berrios is not expendable depth, but necessity, drama, and all. And yes, there has been drama. John Schneider all but confirmed there were conversations behind the scenes, regrets aired, frustrations acknowledged. Berrios leaving the team during the postseason last year cast a long shadow, but by all accounts, that shadow is beginning to lift. Baseball clubhouses are fragile ecosystems, and sometimes tension is the price of caring too much. The real question now is not what happened, But what comes next, and whether trust can be rebuilt quickly enough to matter. Zoom out, and the rotation picture looks thinner than it did on paper. Kevin Gausman is a year older. Cody Ponce hasn't been a full-time Major League starter in years. Trey Savage is electric, but his workload will be managed carefully, likely capped near last year's total. Ricky Tiedemann isn't an immediate solution. All of a sudden, what once felt like a surplus feels like a tightrope. One misstep, one more injury, and the margin for error vanishes. This is where Max Scherzer re-enters the conversation, almost uninvited, like a ghost of competitive chaos. Mad Max is not a savior, and expecting him to be would be foolish. But as a depth piece, a mentor, a part-time starter and full-time edge setter, he makes an unsettling amount of sense. He doesn't need to throw 180 innings. He needs to exist, to be there when the season inevitably tests the staff's resolve. Meanwhile, the offensive side of the roster is quietly screaming for attention. Anthony Santander's absence is not just a hole, it's a void in the middle of the order. Suddenly, you're asking George Springer to rewind the clock, Addison Barger to accelerate his development, and role players to stretch beyond their natural limits. Can it work? Possibly. Should it be Plan A? That's far less convincing. Do you really want to see Nathan Lukes playing 130 games, especially given his splits and limited offensive ceiling? The projections will tell you everything is fine if things break right. They always do. But baseball seasons are not built on best-case scenarios. They're built on contingency, on preparation, on acknowledging that something will go wrong and deciding in advance how much pain you're willing to tolerate. The AL East has not stood still. Garrett Cole is coming back. The Baltimore Orioles have adjusted and added. No one is waiting for Toronto to catch up. That's why AJ's move feels imminent. Not because Ross Atkins is reckless, but because the calendar is unforgiving. Spring training reporters are arriving, players are filtering in, and every bullpen session is being logged and dissected. Once games begin, leverage changes. Prices rise. Options disappear. If there is a time to act, it is now, while flexibility still exists. Atkins has at least given fans one thing they desperately needed after yesterday's news: honesty. He admitted they are still exploring every avenue. He didn't sugarcoat the injuries. He didn't declare the roster finished. That matters. It signals intent, and intent is often the first step toward action. Whether that action is Bassett, Scherzer, a bat, or an under-the-radar trade, something is coming. And that's what makes this moment strangely exciting, even through the anxiety. Baseball is back, not in theory, but in consequence. Decisions made now will echo for months. If you've been following the Blue Jays report, you know this is where seasons are quietly shaped, long before standings tell the story. So stick with us, like the video, share it, and subscribe, because this spring is already writing its own chaotic script, and the next chapter is about to drop. Cheers.